Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here with us today. We're here today to talk about growth in franchising, first steps for making it happen. For those of you who have been with us throughout our series, this is our fourth of 4 topics that are looking into franchising as a small business opportunity and bringing resources to you from financial, accessing capital, identifying brands, and researching opportunities and finding the best fit for you moving forward. And today in particular, we're going to focus on that last step in the journey and then making it happen. So how do you move from I found the brand and now I want to really get started and what that takes? And we're going to be leaning into additional conversations about the capital and the banking processes, legal, building a business support team, and then just discussing your questions across the board on doing that. But before we get started, we want to go through some logistical comments and introduce you to the folks who are going to be leading you through our session today. My name is Ricky Amos. I am the Executive Director of the International Franchise Associations Foundation based here in Washington, D.C. And we at the IFA are just really passionate about the role that franchising can play in helping small business owners become entrepreneurs and realize their small business dream. So I'm starting out with that because I want to talk a little bit about what's our why. Why are we convening this session here today? And why are we working with such great partners to share this information with you? And it's because, you know, across all of our organizations, I think we recognize that both the role of how important diversity, equity, and inclusion is in driving business success, but also that there are real challenges that are out there for communities in realizing their small business dream. And we see all of our partners here and all of our presenters see us as an opportunity to provide a nexus of information to help everybody get past those hurdles and achieve their small business goals. And we want to connect that information to you. And as we do that, I also thought I'd share some data and research. What do we know via the role that we have at the International Franchise Association about franchising as an opportunity and a solution, particularly for underrepresented communities. And I find some of these numbers interesting, so I wanted to share them with us today as an opportunity to guide some of our discussion. You know, one of the things that we have learned in our most recent research that the IFA has done in concert with Oxford Economics is that Black-owned franchises earn 2.2 times more than Black-owned independent businesses on average. We know that companies with stronger ethnic and cultural diversity were 22% more likely to outperform companies lacking cultural diversity. And we also know from research that we've done through the Diversity Institute that franchising is a really strong entrepreneurial opportunity for underrepresented communities. So we know about 31% of minority ownership in franchising compared to about 19% of non-franchise businesses. And that's not to say that there isn't work to be done and that we all can't get better, and that's part of what we are leaning into at the Diversity Institute. And Earsa Jackson will be one of the speakers you're going to get to know here shortly, as well as the chairman of our Diversity Institute at the IFA. And we believe our responsibility is to help increase those numbers. How can we bring resources even further into the game and improve the positive impact that franchising can have on communities across the country, in particular into underrepresented communities of color, women, veterans, you name it. And so we're really excited to bring this really wonderful panel and our partners together to talk about it today. So with that, I do want to make sure I say thank you first to our sponsor, KeyBank. You'll be meeting Jim here in a minute. KeyBank has been just an invaluable partner to us at the Diversity Institute and the IFA Foundation. Without them, we wouldn't be convening these conversations. So thank you, Jim. Thank you, KeyBank. You know, this is an organization who really, where passion is meeting their purpose, where they are leaning into their roles and their opportunities and their responsibilities as lenders to help and support communities in realizing their small business dreams. So we're really very fortunate to have their expertise with us here today. And with that as well, we are also so delighted to continue our partnership with the U.S. Black Chamber. You know, I think across both of our organizations, we're just so driven and passionate about serving the Black entrepreneur and helping them achieve small business ownership dreams. And so, Phil, thank you so much for your support of all of these programs in helping to reach our shared communities. And we look forward to opportunities to continue working together. A couple of logistical announcements. This webinar is being recorded. You might have seen that as you logged in, because our goal will be to post it and make sure that others can continue to come back to this educational content. And we encourage you to come back to it as well as you continue down your path, and make sure that you can use it as a resource going forward. We'll be taking questions via one of two ways, whichever way you're more comfortable. We have the chat in the bottom of the Zoom box, and we also see the Q&A. So we'll be fielding those and making sure that we pose those to our panelists at the end of our discussion, but please keep those questions coming throughout the panel. And with that, I want to turn you over to our esteemed and fabulous panelists who are going to be sharing their expertise today. And Jim, I will turn it over to you first.
Thank you so much, Ricky, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Fliss. I'm the National SBA and Franchising Manager at KeyBank. We're one of the nation's top 10 SBA lenders in the country. And I think, more importantly, very proud to have underwritten this event. I'm going to spend some time as we get going here today talking about access to capital and how fundamental that is to our corporate purpose at Key, which is helping communities to thrive. We are tremendously focused on bridging the wealth gap at Key, and we firmly believe that entrepreneurship, support of small business, is critical to communities. The small business owners are the entities that create jobs, and they drive the economy. So it's central to our mission of helping communities to thrive. I'd also like to thank Ricky and everyone at the IFA, the U.S. Black Chamber, Stan Friedman at Sensible Franchising, and last but not least, our guest speakers today, which you are going to thoroughly enjoy. So with that, I will pass it over to Philip Dunn at the U.S. Black Chamber. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you all for attending and watching today. First, I want to say thank you to Ricky and to the IFA and to IFA's leadership for partnering with USBC. I also want to thank you, Jim, and KeyBank for supporting the IFA in this initiative and making sure that they reach out to our community. I want to just real quickly reintroduce myself. My name is Philip Dunn, and I'm with the USBC. I'm one of the program managers at the USBC. On behalf of our president, Ron Busby, our board, and our staff, I want to thank everyone for attending today and engaging in this very important topic today, and that is on the first steps to making franchising happen. So to all of you who are watching, I want to make sure that you listen in to the panel. They're going to share some very critical information. We at the USBC, we believe that franchising is one of those potential on-ramps into starting your own business. And we feel like it's more than an on-ramp, it's a dedicated lane. So if you're a franchise owner, or if you participate in franchising, you'll find that you have dedicated processes, dedicated resources, all of those things that help to support those numbers that Ricky mentioned earlier. So I want to make sure that you tune in, zoom in, listen in, and really soak up all of this information that we're going to share on today. Last point I want to make, I want to thank my counterpart, Ashley Mancini, for helping to arrange this panel discussion here today. Also want to thank our panelists who are going to share a lot of great information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Stan Friedman.
Thank you, Phil. And Phil, I know that tonight is what, game 3 of the World Series. And come on, I know you've got a prop down there that you're just dying to show. Come on, give it up. All right. You're obviously on the other end of this equation. Can you see mine there? But it's kind of timely, isn't it? Because what we're going to do today is we're going to share some information, but we're known to have some fun around the IFA, and there's nothing better than learning and having a good time doing it. And so what we've got today are 2 of the best teams available, just like the Astros and the Braves. And we've got Earsa Jackson, who is going to speak from a legal perspective, and she's the best in class at what she does. There's a lot of legalese involved in franchising, although it's an industry and a business model that is totally dependent on relationships. It's also very dependent on documentation that enforces brand standards and protects the brands for all the stakeholders that invest. Sometimes that can get overwhelming, but there's nobody as disarming as Earsa to share some of that conversation around the legal obligations, and she's going to do that for us in just a few moments. And on the banking side, you've already met Jim Fliss, and we're not going to ask him to tell you which hat he's got because it's neither team that's playing ball tonight. The good news is that you're with a bunch of professionals here who really care and love to share. I've been in franchising for 33 years. I'm a founding member of the IFA's Diversity Institute. I'm a proud recipient of the Ronald E. Harrison Diversity Award, which IFA honored me with in 2011. And so I've put my heart into this space for a great many years and have always tried to help make the business case for diversity in franchising, because I never felt I had any authority over anyone's social, moral, or political compass. But I've tried to make the business case. And while all cases are important, that's one that we can all agree on. There are underserved communities that need franchising to be part of those communities. And there are underserved people that are dependent on paychecks or depending on assistance from government that could be running their own businesses and building a dream for themselves and for their families and building legacy through franchising. And so today we're going to conclude this series with some of the nuts and bolts. And I hope you've watched some of the previous webinars. If you've not seen them yet, please go back and catch up on what you've missed, because this one culminates with, okay, as Ricky said, you've learned this and you've learned that. Now, what do you do with it? So we're going to get into the meat of that today. And I'm going to ask our panelists one by one to identify themselves. Some of us are going to play color commentary, Ricky, myself, and Connie Hill-Johnson. But the A team, the people that are going to be doing the big lift today are Jim and Earsa. Earsa, can I start with you? How about a few moments to share with us who you are and what your background is all about in franchising?
Thank you, Stan. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Earsa Jackson. I'm a franchise attorney. I've been in the industry for 23 years now. I have the pleasure of leading my firm's franchise and licensing team, but I also have the pleasure of chairing the IFA Diversity Institute. I'm a founding member of the Black Franchise Leadership Council, and I'm a big believer in education and taking the message of franchising to underserved communities. So I'm delighted to be able to share some remarks on the legal aspects a little bit later, but thank you, Stan, for the introduction.
Pleased to be having you with us today, Earsa, and we're looking forward to learning as much as you can share in the time allotted today. I'm going to ask now for Connie Hill-Johnson to say hello and tell us who you are, Connie.
Thanks, Stan. My name again is Connie Hill-Johnson. I hail from Cleveland, Ohio. That's where I am right now. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Jim, okay. And I'm a franchisee, own and operate Visiting Angels Living Assistance Services. It's a home care agency. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I will be 20 years old next year in the business. I didn't think I'd stay around that long, but I'm still here. I really thought in 2001, too, that I was at the beginning of the curve in terms of serving the aging population. And I still say that anyone who gets into this business, we're still at the beginning of the curve in terms of the need for the service, as most of our loved ones and seniors in our community want to age in place and stay at home. I'm excited to be here. I have to admit, true transparency, that I did not know a lot about IFA until Mr. Stan Friedman came to Cleveland and asked me to be on a panel here talking to some folks. Again, underserved community, a significant amount of African Americans, about really considering franchising as a viable business option. I will close by saying, and Mr. Dunn might appreciate this, is people always say, how did you get introduced to franchising? I had been downsized, so I literally was unemployed, and read an article in Black Enterprise magazine. that talked about the number of minorities going into franchising. And I dug in and I got on a website, and one link led to another. And here I am 20 years later, thanks to Black Enterprise Magazine. So a shout out to them in terms of promoting franchising for African Americans to consider.
Thank you so much, Connie. And for those of you in the audience who may find this process and the things that we talk about a little daunting sometimes, maybe a little frightening sometimes, Connie Hill Johnson not only lived through those emotions and fears that are human nature, but she did it on the heels of 9/11. She became a franchisee when the rest of the world was in retreat about fear of what just happened and how am I going to make sense out of the rest of my life. Connie doubled down, and that's when she became a franchisee. So who better than Connie to be in the color commentary booth with us here today? And as Jim begins this conversation and takes about 20 or so minutes plus minus talking about the banking side, because it all starts with the money. It's just like buying a house. You know, you can't get qualified, you can't buy a house without getting qualified. You don't want to wait until you find the house of your dreams to begin looking for money, because that house will be sold and you'll have missed it. So similarly here, you may find a business opportunity that interests you, but you need to have the money behind you. And Jim's going to walk us through some of those nuts and bolts on the financing side. And then I'm going to invite Connie and any of the others in our color commentary booth, Phil, myself, Ricky, anybody at any point that you feel appropriate, there's a cogent point that you can practically and from practical experience throw in on. Jim's prepared for you. He'll know that he'll hit the hold button and let you get your thoughts in. So why don't we kick it off with Mr. Jim Fliss, Mr. Money himself.
Big money.
Get the show on the road.
Well, thank you, Stan, and everyone. And picking up on a couple of things you said, you know, today is going to be talking about the meat of it. Some of it can be daunting, and there needs to be some level of optimism through all of this. So, you know, part of what I'm going to cover here today is exactly that, sort of the meat and potatoes, this notion of access to capital. You know, how do you get a loan? How do you get financed? And I think more importantly, talk a little bit about the roadmap. So, you know, more specifically, what are the financing sources? What do lenders look for? How do I get started? You know, who can help? And that's the part of this that can seem at some level maybe a little daunting, a little technical. But we're going to talk about how to blaze that trail and what that roadmap looks like. And the other half of, you know, what I want everyone to remember is or in part is a sense of optimism. You know, everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. Some of you may be ready to go out and buy a franchise right now. Some it may take 6, 12, 18 months. You know, but did you know that, you know, 70% of the franchise brands out there have a franchise fee of less than $30,000? Did you know that you can get into a franchise for roughly 10% down, right? 75% of the franchise systems require startup capital of less than $250,000. 43 require less than 100, and 17% require less than 50. So while this part of this may be daunting and seem technical, I also wanted to share some of those statistics with you to ensure that, you know, it is attainable. Stan, you know, you and I were talking the other day about this segment, and one of the questions that you asked is should I get pre-qualified? You know, should a prospective franchisee get pre-qualified with a bank, and what does that look like? And I guess the way I would answer that is yes. You know, bankers are definitely willing to have an initial conversation at the early stages, but keep in mind, there are some limitations to what degree a banker can truly set your expectations without getting a little bit more specific. You know, that said, I do think it's smart to have the initial conversation to start to build rapport with the banker, to determine the primary things that a bank will look for, like, you know, rates and structures and fees and sort of what's involved in that. I would draw the distinction between, you know, getting pre-qualified for a home is a little bit different than getting pre-qualified for a commercial endeavor. So, when you go to get pre-qualified for a home, it's simple in that, a bank's going to say, you say, look, I got a job. This is how much I make. I've got my down payment. They pull credit, put it into a little machine, and it sort of spits out. You're sort of pre-qualified for this size of a loan. There's more variables involved in a commercial loan to fully pre-qualify you to that degree. So things that we would ask for are the size, right? But we would also ask additional questions like, how is the brand doing? How is the performance? We would need some specifics around cost, right? What's the cost of the equipment? What is it going to cost to build the space out? How long is it going to take to ramp sales up and profit and sort of demonstrate, the ability to, repay the loan? So, in terms of, for lack of a better term, a pre-qualification conversation with the bank, if we sit down, I think the first thing that I would ask is, what's the size of the loan? Is this a small loan or a large loan? And there's no right or wrong answer, but that will frame up, kind of the follow-on questions that I'll have. So once we know the size of the loan, I'm going to focus in on three things. One is going to be cash, one is going to be credit, and the third is going to be experience, right? So in terms of cash, more specifically, relative to the size of the loan you're contemplating or the size of the project, is do you have an equity injection? Do you have a down payment? Okay. So a general rule of thumb is you're going to need to have roughly 10% down of whatever it is that the project costs, roughly 10% of that as a down payment. And there's sometimes we can go less, and I'll get to that in a minute. But think generally 10%. Bank's also going to ask is what's the source of that equity, down payment? Was it earned or was it gifted? All things being equal, I think a bank would generally like people to have sort of squirreled away and saved up their own money because it's going to keep their interest a little bit more aligned. As we say in banking, they'll have a little bit more skin in the game. But first thing is equity injection. The second thing is flowback, right? So after you put your down payment in to the transaction towards the deal, how much cash do you have for contingencies, right? There's no right or wrong answer for this. Like I said, 10% could vary. A lot of times a bank is going to want to see 6 to 12 months of debt service payment. So if we figure out, how big your loan is and what it's going to cost every month, let's say it's $1,000. So after you make your equity injection, you're going to want to have somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000 in dry powder in a checking account for contingencies. Okay, so that's probably the first thing that we check. Second thing that a banker is going to look for is a sense of your personal credit history. So a bank will typically pull a credit report, and those range the score between the 300s and the 800s. Generally speaking, a bank is going to want to see you in the mid to upper 6s. But again, this is going to vary. Just trying to set your expectations of where you need to be generally. A bank's also going to ask, are you current on taxes? Have you filed bankruptcy along the way? General qualifying questions. And the third thing that we'll focus on that pre-screen, pre-approval sort of process is, remember, is experience. But remember, with franchising, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself, right? So there is a playbook that you get when you join a franchise system, and there's great benefit in that. You don't need an MBA from the Harvard Business School, but I would ask a question. Let's say you want to open a pizza shop. As a banker, I say, well, have you ever worked in restaurants? Do you really know what you're getting into here? And if you say, yeah, I've worked at McDonald's and I've kind of worked up through the ranks and I've done different jobs and I understand the operating procedures, that's music to a banker's ears because it tells me that you've got some experience that's applicable, and you have a sense of maybe what you're getting into. Now,
hey, can I throw a question at you at
Sure.
At this particular point? We've had a lot of questions from attendees of our prior programs about the need to sometimes be in the business, or can I keep my job? Can I be a non-participating owner of the business? And we know on the IFA side that that's case by case decision that a franchisor will make. How do you view that as a banker, and how important is that question to you?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the business. I mean, it's going to depend on, you know, you know, it is going to depend on the individual applicant. If someone's got sort of the wherewithal to put the dollars in and hire some people to sort of manage the business and run the business, or if a business is, say, less, you know, sort of hands-on intensive where you need to be there all the time, a bank's going to be generally more okay with that. If it's a business that requires you to be there running it, you know, sort of day in and day out, a bank is going to kind of insist on that.
Right.
So that's one of those, Stan, it really just sort of depends. But I would tell you as a banker, to answer your question directly, I think franchising is a great model. Franchising gives you a playbook, it gives you infrastructure, it gives you a support in a lot of ways. Again, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. And while franchising is great, it is not a complete substitute for someone actually running the business. In my experience, very few businesses run sort of on autopilot. You know, so if you're going to put your life savings into a franchise, I would tell you, be prepared to put in the hours and put in the time and be there.
Connie, can I ask you as the franchisee to back that up with practicality?
Yeah, I'm over here just nodding as Jim is talking, nodding. And a lot is going to probably depend on what the specific brand is, but just briefly, my background was in healthcare. And I had worked in hospital settings, and I have a graduate degree in healthcare. So when I chose Visiting Angels, a home care agency, I thought it was a good fit because it may not be direct healthcare in terms of clinical care, but I was dealing with aging folks who had a lot of chronic diseases. And I was comfortable in that healthcare arena, going in and out of hospitals, in and out of rehab centers, in and out of nursing homes because of my background. That being said, when I started, it was just me. At that time, Visiting Angels allowed franchisees to start their business in their home. And so I literally moved back in with my mom and set up in the basement, the same basement I played with Barbie dolls and easy bake ovens. And I had a space heater at my feet in the wintertime and dug in. And that was my life for a good year before I brought someone on board. I remember my mom would yell down in the basement and say, "Are you coming up for dinner? Are you coming up for dinner?" But it was all on 24/7 for me. And my business is a 24/7 business. It's not a restaurant that closes at 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night. So I lived it, I breathed it, I slept it, and I kept a phone tethered to my hip for a long time.
And that's the spirit, right? I mean, if you've got an entrepreneur, Stan, that just say is super well heeled, and they can, you know, they have the wherewithal to, you know, buy 4, 5, 6 franchises and put the infrastructure in place, that's one thing. But for most small businesses, and it's not just franchising, you got to be there. You know, you got to be there, and there's no substitute for that. You know, you got to be there and run the business. And
can I just say one other quick thing? I think what I quickly recognized that not only was I promoting the Visiting Angels brand, but I was promoting at that time I wasn't married, I was promoting the Connie Hill brand. And so it was equally important to me in my community that people knew the brand of Connie Hill in addition to the brand of Visiting Angels. And so as with most businesses, I'm sure there's a lot of relationship building. There's a lot of relationship building. And the first question is, why should they trust me? Why would you trust me to take care of your mom? So there was a lot of that intangible stuff that I had to do before I could even totally focus on growing the numbers.
Jim, before I ask you any, I have got one last question to ask you, but
Sure.
if you have anything you want to close out with first.
Yeah, I could just really put a bow on that first segment, Stan. Just so when you sit down with your bank early on, make sure you understand the size of the project. A banker's going to zero in on how much cash do you have for an equity injection and fallback. They're going to ask you questions about your personal credit, and they're going to ask you questions about your general experience. Okay. Now, remember, a pre-qualification discussion like that is not going to be an approval or a declination. It's just going to be to start to frame things up. A lot of times a banker at that point can issue what's called a term sheet that'll lay everything out. Who's borrowing it? How much? For what? What collateral do we have? Who's going to guarantee the loan? What the rate is? All of that. But then there'll be a disclaimer at the bottom that says this is not a commitment to lend. Okay. When you formally apply, and I'll talk about that next, you would actually get a formal approval, a formal commitment letter that'll look a lot like a term sheet, but it'll say you are approved and such bank is ready to give you the financing. So that was it, Stan.
All right, move on from there, if you would, to the next piece. Did you have one more section you wanted to?
Yeah, I can go through. So that was kind of that pre-approval, early stage conversation with your banker. So the question, I guess, then becomes, well, how do I get formally qualified? And what resources are available to me? Well, obviously, to get formally approved, you need to formally apply, right? So at this point, a bank is going to ask for a handful of things, and I'll run through those. The first thing all banks are going to ask for is a loan application. And usually these are pretty straightforward: name, address, request, who's going to own the company. Bank is also going to ask for a breakdown or use of proceeds. So how much do you want to borrow for equipment? How much is it going to cost to build the space out? How much do you need for working capital, fees, et cetera? And they're going to ask for that sort of detailed breakdown. They're going to ask for what we call in the banking world a loan package. And a loan package is almost at all banks is going to be 3 years of personal tax returns, a personal financial statement. So a personal financial statement is just a listing of all of your assets, cash, stocks, home, car, personal belongings. And on the liability side, credit card, debt, mortgage debt, auto loan debt, all on a sheet of paper. The third thing that a bank is going to ask for is a resume. Gets at some of the experience that we talked about. And then in the case of you buying a franchise, let's say you want to buy an existing franchise rather than start one, we would ask for tax returns and financials on the company that you were trying to buy. The fourth thing, and I touched on this earlier, is the personal credit, the FICO scores. It's going to be important, obviously, that you pay your bills on time. You reduce as much credit card debt as possible. You're current on all term debt. There's a lot of resources out there if your personal credit's been dinged up, to sort of find ways to rebuild that. But that's going to be an important piece in the puzzle as well. And the last thing is, for lack of a better term, a business plan, and that's really how you're going to perform your due diligence, your exploration, and answer the questions a bank may have. So I think it starts with, good brand research, right? So when you say, hey, I like this particular franchise, you should have a point of view on how is the franchise performing? Are they growing or are they dying? Are they opening stores or are stores closing? What type of support does the franchisor provide? Both in terms of onboarding, initial training, or let's say you get into it for 6 to 12 months and it's going up, and then you hit a bump in the road and things start going the other way. Are they going to come in and help provide the support to not only get you ramped up, but when you hit a bump in the road? Is it a good fit for your background? I think you need to be able to articulate, this is why like Connie was talking, she obviously had some passion for that particular industry. It was a good fit for her personality. I think a banker will pick up on that. You can get information from the franchise disclosure documents. So all franchisors need to provide this document that talks about everything that's going on with that particular brand. I would encourage you to read it and reread it again. Have a sense of, the competition, what's out there. How does this brand fit versus other brands? You're going to need to think about things like sales, expenses, profits. When is all this going to happen? Because a bank's going to say, look, we're going to loan you the money. You got to show us how and when you're going to be able to repay us. Okay. And it is much easier with a franchise concept, but banks are going to be looking at your financial projections, and as importantly as anything, what are the assumptions around those projections? So you say on paper, I'm going to do this much in sales, it's going to cost me this much in expense, and I'm going to make this much in profit. But the assumptions around, how did you arrive at those numbers? At the end of the day, you want to show the ability to, sort of minimize the risk and repay the loan, but not only the loan for the franchise that you're buying or starting, but you're also going to have personal obligations, right? So does, to your point, Stan, if you walk away from a job, go out and buy a franchise and get a loan, you're going to need to demonstrate that you can pay the loan back for the business and also provide yourself with enough for your own, rent or mortgage or car payments and food and things of that nature. So the business is going to need to support both. And let's assume for a minute, you've got your formal approval. The bank is going to work with you on what we call closing items. And these are the things that you're going to need to collect, sort of dot the I's and cross the T's before everyone signs loan documents. But things like insurance, leases. So if you're leasing a space from a landlord, what does that lease look like? If you're going to have the space built out, what are your contractor's bids? What's it going to cost? Who's going to do all the improvements to the space you're moving into? If you're buying an existing franchise, you'll need a buy-sell agreement, and obviously you'll need to produce any of the franchise documents to the bank as well. So, that's basically what you're going to need to be formally, qualified. It's that application, a use of proceeds, the standard loan package with tax returns, PFS, and resume. Bank's going to look at your credit, and then, for lack of a better term, a business plan, or at least be, in a position to answer the bank's questions and say why, a bank should loan you the money. Lots of resources available to help you, Stan. I can talk about that now, or if you had a question based on that, I'm happy to stop there.
Why don't we hold for the moment? We're going to come back later and talk about things like SCORE and other places that provide assistance. I want to just encourage you. You talked the business plan twice, and I just want to share something that's just common sense, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen this when I was reviewing applicants for franchises, and I was in the ice cream business at that time. Mm-hmm. And I would get business plans for a store on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And they were showing me that they were top line sales in the months of January and February were going to be the same as the months of June, July, and August. And I would scratch my head and say, really?
Right.
So just don't get overwhelmed by numbers and math. Use your head and think about common sense issues like that. You're not going to sell as much ice cream in Michigan in January or February as you are in June or July. So
Stan, I'll tell you a quick funny story if I could. When I started in banking lots of years ago, we asked the borrower for his financial projections, and I was with this old crusty old banker, and I was following around as this young kid, and he takes these financials and he throws them in the garbage. I said, what on earth are you doing? He said, well, I already know what they say. It says that they're going to make a ton of money. He says, what I care about are the assumptions around their money. I want to hear them tell me exactly how they're going to drive sales, how they're going to manage expenses, how they're going to drive profit. That's what I want to hear about.
Right.
So from a, and we'll get to this in just a second, putting together a simple financial plan of sales and costs and expenses and profit, relative to, what your debt payment is. That's a pretty easy part. And the franchisor will be able to help you with that to a degree. It's the assumptions around them. That's always what's important to a banker.
Jim, what else can you give us now before we move over to Earsa? Is there anything else you want to
Yeah,
share?
I would just say just a couple of things. I wanted to touch, Stan, on, kind of what resources are available, sort of the who can help you with some of this. I would say, quickly, the franchisor is a great place to start. Look at the FDDs. They're going to provide you marketing materials. Let's say you're going to open a retail location, right? They're going to be able to tap into a database and say, hey, based on this demographic, based on this buying power, this traffic pattern, this location should be optimal, right? And sharing that with the bank will help. Would encourage you to meet with franchisees. I would encourage you to meet with the franchisor. Also, resources available. This is probably a good time to start surrounding yourself with professionals. Get a CPA, an attorney, a consultant, someone that's business savvy that you can sort of bounce these things off of. A great thing, and Stan, you mentioned this a minute ago, is SCORE. So SCORE is a partnership with the U.S. Small Business Administration. They've been around for 50 years. Basically, what SCORE does is they provide free consulting, and I'll oversimplify. There's, a lot of these folks are retired business people. There's 300 chapters and 11,000 volunteers around the country. They'll help you with things like your business plan and putting together financial statements and fixing up your credit. So that's a great resource. You can find them at www.score.org. The IFA, the Black Chamber, your banker, networking events. I think a lot of it is there's a lot of people that are out there that are willing and able to help. You just have to ask. And then the last thing I wanted to say, Stan, real quick, is just what are the financing tools available? So there's conventional financing, just straight bank financing. That's where you're going to need to put a down payment somewhere between 10 and 30%. These are typically shorter terms, and banks are going to look for collateral. There's SBA financing, which you can do at 10% down. And the nice thing with SBA financing is it will help you conserve cash through a smaller down payment. You have to come to the table with less money, and they will give you a longer amortization. So by giving you more time to pay the loan back, that's going to reduce your monthly payment and make it easier for the business to get from point A to point B. There's small business investment companies that offer debt and equity. Look for them in your local markets. Seller financing. So sometimes you don't come to a bank because maybe you don't have as big of a down payment, but a seller can carry paper if you're looking to buy an existing franchise, or sometimes you work in conjunction. You put some money down, the bank loans some money, and the seller carries some paper. So seller financing is an option. Friends and family, are great to hit up for, to borrow the down payment. It could be a loan, it could be a gift. Sometimes, and I don't think super frequently, the franchisor can provide financing. And the last thing that I wanted to mention was 401k rollover. So maybe you don't have a lot of money squirreled away in your checking account, but you've been putting money off to the side into your 401k. That's an option for people to tap equity to put into a franchise opportunity. It's a big deal when you start talking about playing with your retirement savings. I would encourage you to work with one of the bigger companies that will help you facilitate that rollover and think through things like the tax considerations. But 401k rollovers are a great option as well.
Let's park it right there for now, Jim. And if we go back to the original metaphor of two great teams taking the field, I don't know whether you're the Braves or the Astros right now. And not to put any real pressure on Earsa, that was quite a bit of information and a lot to take in, but you cut it down to bite-sized pieces, Jim, and we thank you very much for
My pleasure.
sharing that. Stick around. We're going to come back to you in the Q&A. But first, it's over to Earsa. Now, Earsa, that's a heavy lift that we just heard. We may have frightened some people a little bit, but I'm counting on your ability to share with them some of the legalese in a manner of speaking that doesn't frighten them anymore. It's, you know, it's
All right, Stan.
you can't not present this information to anybody. You have to deliver it, and there's no easy way to do that. But these are the things that come with the territory if you're going to get into business for yourself and rely on the bank and the franchisor to give you the tools that you need to get it done. These are the things you really need to know. Earsa, take it away.
Thank you, Stan. Jim teed it up very nicely. He alluded to the franchise disclosure document, or FDD, a couple of times. I like to start introducing the FDD by demystifying it. For those who have seen a franchise disclosure document, it's a large document, but let me step back to explain why that document is provided. But even before you get that franchise disclosure document, the process that Jim explained, where the bank gets information from you, they might want a resume, an application, or an interest form. That's going to be a similar process when you reach out to the franchisor. Franchisor is likely going to ask about what territory you're interested in, where you are, get a little bit of your background first. But the first kind of real introduction to the franchise system really should be that franchise disclosure document. It is chock full of information. The Federal Trade Commission franchise rule provides 23 items of information that every franchisor is going to include in that document. There are some exceptions and exclusions, and we won't get into those. So we'll talk generally about the franchise disclosure document. So it's regulated at the federal level. It's also regulated at the state level. So some states will require that a franchise brand register before offering. And then there are some franchise relationship laws. Those laws would govern the relationship after the agreement was signed. What happens if there's a termination or transfer or renewal? We won't, for purposes of today, focus on the franchise relationship laws as much as we'll focus on the franchise disclosure document. Now, I said there are 23 items of information. We won't go through those and comb through those, but what I like to throw out are questions that all of you are going to want to know and tell you where to find them in the document. That's a lot more interesting. First of all, sort of some basic information. How long has the company been around, and how long have they been offering franchises? Well, in item 1 of that franchise disclosure document, you're going to have information about the franchisor, when they started business, how long they've been operating the business. That's information that you're going to want to know going in, just kind of some baseline information. Because you're invested in a franchise, you want the infrastructure. We talked about a game plan and having a roadmap to operating a business. So in order to make sure you've got a good roadmap, you're going to be interested in the franchisor's management team, sort of who's supporting the management team for the franchisor. Item 2 of that disclosure document is going to give you some information about the management team. That's going to equip you with names of individuals, either reach out to them, Google them, see what you can find out about those individuals. A question that everyone sitting there is going to have is, how much is it going to cost for me to get into this franchise? Jim did a good job of talking about the variety of initial franchise fees. They are going to vary from franchisor to franchisor, but item 5 of that disclosure document is going to lay out what the initial franchise fees are. You're going to also want to know what it's going to cost going forward after you sign the agreement. There's a section that's going to discuss royalties. I get a question all the time about, well, what are the royalties? They're going to vary from system to system. The best comparison is to look within the industry, and then you get a kind of a better baseline of, is this high or low, based on, hey, I'm looking at burger franchises, and here's the span that I'm seeing. But they have to disclose what that royalty fee is. There's typically going to be an advertising fee And there likely would be some type of technology fee, but any recurring fees, you'll know that just by looking in the franchise disclosure document in item 6. Now, there's another big key on the dollars that's going to be really important. And that's, okay, you told me about the initial franchise fee and the ongoing fees. How much is it going to cost for me to open this business? There is a section in the franchise disclosure document, item 7, that's going to give you an estimated cost for opening the business. Now, this information is great information as a starting point for you. What I typically do when I'm talking to a prospective franchisee is I want them to look at that information, but I also want them to have discussions with current franchisees, for instance. How are these numbers compared to what you actually spent to get your business open? Because that sort of gives you a comparison and a baseline on that. So you're going to start kind of testing some of these numbers. Make sure that you review any type of disclaimers that are in there. But that is a good number. Your banker is also going to be interested in looking at that section for sure as you go to figure out what you're going to need to get from the bank. The bank is certainly going to be interested in that item 7. We talked about this roadmap. So you're going to be interested in what support the franchisor is going to provide. There's a section in the disclosure document, item 11, that's going to lay out all of the assistance that the franchisor is going to provide. Typically, you're going to talk about the initial training. There's typically going to be site selection, support, might be vendor list, you name it. So the franchisor is going to lay that out. There should be a training schedule in that item 11 also. Remember, you're buying a roadmap. So that item 11 is going to be important for you to review. On the flip side, it's important for you to ask yourself, what's going to be required of me as a franchisee? Item 9 of the disclosure document is going to lay out franchisees' responsibilities. Obviously, kind of the biggest one is you got to follow the system. Now, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. Being involved in a system, there are going to be requirements. I get questions all the time about kind of the parameters and kind of how far you can go to kind of individualize things. It's really important that you follow the system. The system protects not only you and franchisor, but everybody in the system. So you want everyone in the system in compliance because it represents the brand. Connie made a really good statement about not only building the franchisor's brand, but she was building her individual brand. So Connie knows when she goes out to the market, they're going to first see Connie. They'll obviously see her franchisor brand, but the branding is really important. So it's important for everyone to be in compliance so that the system is strong. Some of the things that you're going to be required to do is stick to the plan. If there are approved products, those are the products that you can offer. You can't test any products. So that's going to be really important that you know what those obligations are. Jim mentioned this, and I wanted to tell you where to look in the franchise disclosure document if, in fact, the franchisor offers financing. Some brands do offer financing or they've got preferred relationships. So item 10 of that disclosure document is going to discuss in detail if there's a financing arrangement, what that arrangement is, or it might identify preferred lenders. So check there. I wanted to make sure that I looped back because this is a question that was raised, I think, in a prior program about what happens if I spend a lot of money on a franchise, can the franchisor take it back? So I alluded to the requirements to follow the system. Every franchise system is going to have a process in place where if you're not in compliance, you should get a notice of default. That's really important that if you get a notice of default, that you immediately contact the franchisor to identify what the deficiencies are and how you can correct them. There are very few times where you're going to be pulled, your franchise is going to be pulled and you don't know ahead of time that there is a problem. It would have to be something really egregious. Your franchise agreement will provide in detail what defaults are curable and which defaults are non-curable. And I will tell you that most defaults are curable, but you can't put your head in the sand. Usually what happens is someone gets that notice and they don't know how to respond to it. Best thing is pick up the phone, get information. The franchisor is there to keep you in business. It shouldn't be a situation where you're butting heads. Franchisor benefits with you staying in business. So call them up. This is your support system. Other franchisees can be a great support system for you as well. So definitely use those resources. In fact, item 17 of the disclosure document is going to lay out if there is a dispute, how that dispute is resolved, where that dispute is going to be resolved. Will you have to go to arbitration? So that's in item 17 of your franchise disclosure document. Perhaps the question that I get over and over again, and that I'm sure every franchisee wants to know, is how much money can I make with this business? Item 19 of the franchise disclosure document is a place for the franchisor to make what we call a financial performance representation. Most systems now, or many systems now, are going to a financial performance representation. I will tell you that that has been a steady increase over the 23 years that I've been practicing. For instance, 20 years ago, not as many franchise brands were making financial performance representations. But the reality is you go into business to make money. And so if the franchisor can provide you with interesting information to help you make a decision, then all the more to the franchisors and the brands that decide they want to do that. So there's no guarantee, obviously, that you'll meet the performance. And I will tell you, if you're sitting in the seat, the franchisors typically will have a range, kind of high, middle, and low for laying out the performance. Most people think they're going to be in that A range. So when you're doing your projections, I would put myself, although you may be the A performer, how would my financials look if I fall in the middle, and start from there. The franchisor need only have a reasonable basis. So those numbers could be broken down by region. It could be broken down by the size of the store if it's a retail model. So make sure that you understand what those numbers are, what's represented, what's excluded. But that's a lot of good, valuable information as a franchisee to get an idea. Franchisees should also be asking, is the system growing? Is it on the increase or on the decrease? And there's a place for you to look in that franchise disclosure document to start getting a glimpse. Item 20 of the franchise disclosure document is going to talk about the outlets. It's going to give you a 3-year look back. You can look at, are we growing franchise locations? You can look from year to year, and it'll tell you in the very first chart, there's the table 1 that's going to give you a highlight of franchise locations, company locations. Look year by year to see if they're growing. Now, obviously, we've just come out of a pandemic, and so when you look at numbers, make sure you factor that in, that, hey, 2020 is probably not going to be the strongest year, obviously, because of the pandemic. But the nice thing about any prospects that are looking now, we've got history for 2021, and many brands saw a nice rebound for 2021. And so it's going to be important, if you're looking at a system and you see that dip, how are they performing so far in 2021? So that's important information that you are armed with. You can ask the franchisor about. The other great part about item 20 that every prospective franchisee should know about, and that's the list of current franchisees and those that left the system in the last 12 months. This is so, so important. You're going to have contact information. Pick up the phone and call these. Yes, pick up the phone and call these guys. I always tell folks, just start the conversation out. Hey, I'm Joe Smith. I am considering buying a franchise. Would love to know about your experience with the franchisor. Most of them are certainly willing to talk to you. If they're really busy, ask, hey, is there a slower time during the day when I can reach back out to you? Most of them are very willing to talk about their experience. An easy question to ask is, hey, is there anything that you learned after buying the franchise that you would have wanted to know before buying the franchise? Just kind of have some open-ended questions out there. Find out what the support system has been like. Hey, when you had your first problem and you had to pick up the phone, how responsive was the franchisor? These franchisees sat in your seat and they likely called others. And so they like to pay it forward. So don't be shy about reaching out to those prospective franchisees.
Earsa, can I throw something in on that? And I'd also like to dial Connie in for a short portion of this question. You know, you may be in the Midwest as a prospective franchisee, or you may be on the East Coast. It's important that you bear in mind the time zone that you're dialing into when you're calling an existing franchisee for information. You're asking them to be kind to you. Be kind to them first, and don't call them at 6 a.m. their time, because it's 9 o'clock where you are. Be mindful of that. And Connie, I would ask at this juncture if there are any other things that you could coach the audience on with relevance to the types of questions you appreciate hearing versus the types that are just hard to answer.
Well, thanks again, Stan, and thank you for making that comment about what time you call. I've been called from the wee hours of the morning until 10 o'clock at night to the middle of the day on a Sunday afternoon. So I appreciate you sharing that. I want to just comment on something Earsa said too about follow the system. Follow the system. You have purchased a playbook, and Jim, that's my word all the time. You purchased a playbook and you wrote a big fat check. And so if you want to do it your own way, you should go do it your own way and not buy a franchise. I thought I knew Cleveland, and I knew certain things about Cleveland, and my franchisor didn't know it. And if I could have back the thousands of dollars that I chose to spend not listening to the franchisor. So I wanted to stress that a lot. And I say that to people when they call me is, are you a good listener and a good follower? Because your franchisor is there to coach you. You make money, they make money. This isn't rocket science. You make money, they make money. But follow the playbook, because it's proven methodologies that are laid out for you. And so one of the things I tell people when they're looking at various franchises is a newer franchisor, and I'm sure Earsa can speak to this, they're not going to have a whole lot of a track record versus a franchisor that's been around 20 years. And so I can be very anal. I am convinced I called 20 franchisees. I'm convinced I did. Sitting on my couch and in the middle of the floor, trying to make a decision. And for me, I specifically wanted to speak to single women because I was going to be a single woman. I didn't want to speak to couples. I wanted to speak to single women who bought the franchise, because then I could align myself and I could relate to the things that they were telling me. But write your questions down and be mindful of their time. Try not to call during the middle of the day. And I'm giving, so I would say to people, I'm happy to talk to you on a Saturday afternoon. Let me call you. I'm happy to talk to you at 7 o'clock tonight. But sometimes right in the middle of the business day, it's difficult, and I never wanted anyone to feel shortchanged because I was rushing off the phone.
Thank you, Connie. Earsa, I don't want to, I've got other questions or comments that I'd like to make, but I don't want to derail the rest of your portion of the program. So let me return it to you.
Yes, certainly, Stan. I wanted to also give the audience a little tidbit that they can start looking at from kind of the franchisor's financials. So item 21 is going to require that the franchisor provide their financials. So you get to look at their financials, a 3-year period if they've been in business for 3 or more years, audited financials. If you're not equipped to review those, that's where you want to get a CPA or someone astute at looking at those. Those are chock full of good information. You can get a sense of the strength of the system, how it's growing, what royalties they're bringing in, because again, the royalties are going to tell you how well the franchisees are doing. So the audited financials are a really good place to go just to get kind of the overall strength of the system. Really good information there. There's also a section that's going to lay out all of the contracts that you will be required to sign. The typical things are going to be the franchise agreement, personal guarantee, there might be a non-compete that's in there, a technology agreement that's in there. I won't get into the meat of all of these agreements, but just know that it will identify all of the agreements and attach them if you're required to sign them to purchase the franchise. So you'll be able to look through those. The thing that I would say, and I'll leave it here and we can open it for questions, is really important to get the right advice. Get your legal team together, get your CPA, talk to your banker. This is really where you need a team. Most of you have probably heard this saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, take a team with you. And that is really important. Remember that when you go into the franchise, you want to take a team with you. Take the right people with you. With that, Stan, I'm happy to answer questions. I could go into a little bit more detail about the franchise agreement, but I know that the legal topic can be a little heavy for folks, so I don't want to bore people to death.
All right, well, hopefully nobody's been bored at all, much less to death. And I'm going to feel certain that Connie's made some notes on things she won't want to comment on. I'd like to make two quick ones, one on item 20 and one on item 21.
Yes.
In item 20, it's so important that you consider whether if you're in the Cleveland market or you're in the East Northeast and this franchisor is spreading out to Arizona or to California, the likelihood of the brand gaining as much traction for the brand itself is going to be more challenging than if they're building it regionally. And if you're a part of a cluster of a franchise that's only going to develop regionally, they're not going to go nationwide. That's okay. The brand's going to still gain traction. It's going to help your valuation more. You'll get a higher multiple of valuation when you're part of a network of known businesses that share the brand in a regional versus a scattered. There's one here and there's one there and there's one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. No brand traction. It's going to make it harder for you to enhance the value of your own business.
And can I just add something with the item 20 that tracks on to what you're saying? So there's a table in that item 20 that's going to be broken down by the state. So you get to look and see, hey, how many franchisees are in my state? Are we growing? Because it's going to give you a 3-year period. For whatever reason, there are brands that do well in certain markets and not so well. So are you on the decline within your state? So they'll give you a 3-year look back period on that. So that's really important too, to look regionally to see how strong, even surrounding states, how well is the brand represented. So it's chock full of good information.
Yep. And then in item 21, you almost got to where I'm going to go. But the real easy way to see whether this brand is growing is by looking in the financials. There will be 2 revenue lines reported. There'll be a revenue line for initial fee generation and there'll be a revenue line for recurring fees. And so if this franchise has to sell franchises in order to make its revenue, unless it's a new brand or a recently started brand, that shouldn't be the case. If the royalty line isn't growing, that means franchisees are probably not making money and the franchisor is not making money. You've got to have a strong recurring revenue stream. The franchisor has to be focused on building a brand based on the success of his franchisees. And that recurring revenue line should be, you got 3 years to look at. That number year over year should be, unless it's a COVID year, that number year over year should be an increasing number. And if it's not, you probably you're just to ask why not? Why aren't your recurring revenues growing? What's going on here? So those are just 2 things that were important for me to try to call out. And Connie, I want to throw it back to you for some color commentary on all this. And right now, I can't tell which one of these 2 teams, Team Earsa or Team Jim, are the Astros or the Braves. These were 2 winning presentations.
Well, I'm not on either team. The Indians aren't in it, so may the best man win. Just a few highlights as Earsa was talking. I say this to any new franchisee: you will never work harder for anyone than you will for yourself. And so if you're going into this thinking, "Whew, I don't have a boss anymore, and I can kind of kick back," no. I've worked harder in my business in the beginning years than I ever worked for corporate America or in healthcare institutions. So that's the first thing. And when it's your money, you work hard. It's your money. I think the other thing that I didn't do, there's so many lessons of things that I wish I had done, would have been to surround myself with some trusted advisors, not the people that I pay, my accountant and my attorney, but just a group of trusted advisors that I could meet with quarterly, be accountable to, folks that would give me objective counsel during those days when I might have thought, I'm throwing in the towel and just taking a hit here financially. So I would do that over again. I think the other thing is, and this is going to sound like franchising 101, and you're probably going to think, I know that, don't commingle your money. So at the very, very beginning, recognize that your personal funds are not your business funds. And I still meet people who take a while before they set up a business account. And Jim, I do bank at Key, and Key has been very good to me. So have a good relationship with your business bank and your business banker. That's one thing. I think back to what I said before, market. If you spend all of your time in your business and you're not out in the community and people don't know who you are or what your business is, how can you drive traffic to your business? So you have to figure out during the course of any day, how am I going to market? For me personally, it was important to get involved in organizations. And folks would always say, but how can you go sit on that nonprofit board? How can you do this in the community on a Saturday? But I always felt that in my involvement, I was marketing my business because, as you well know, people are always saying, what do you do? What business are you in? So marketing is tremendously important. And then know when to pay yourself. I was raised very conservatively. So I know how to squeeze a dime. And my accountant had to say to me, way past the first year of business, maybe into the second year, you need to pay yourself. It is time for you to take a paycheck and not just a draw, put yourself on payroll. And I kept saying, I can't afford it. I can't afford it. And he kept saying, you can't not afford it. You're going to owe Uncle Sam a whole lot of money. So those are some things that I would share with people that they should keep in mind as they start and recognize that there is help out there. I am always amazed at the people who I hoped would have come to me as they were starting their franchise. And I don't know if they thought they knew it all or I wouldn't share. I'm pretty transparent about where I messed up and where I succeeded. And my job is to make sure you don't repeat the faux pas that I found myself in.
Solid information, Connie. Thank you for being so transparent and sharing it. Ricky, let me throw it to you. I understand we have a couple questions that might fit in your bucket.
We sure do, Stan. So thank you to everybody. This has been a great conversation, and I think really important, to when you're getting ready to start moving forward and making something happen like this in your life, it is really important to understand, like that financial disclosure document. I have to reiterate what Earsa was saying here. That is really your roadmap to understand the ins and outs of that particular business. And then when you start to layer in who you are as a person, what is your financial position, and being able to work with a partner like Jim, and like what Connie was talking about, your bankers, your lawyers, your CPAs, these are a critical kitchen cabinet outside of your family who is going to help you keep it real, because they know your first job is to pay that mortgage and keep, a roof over the head of your children and food on the table. Or if you're a single woman like Connie, you're making your stamp on the world. So, I know at times that this could kind of feel pretty weighty, but going into business is a pretty weighty job. So, thank you all to walking through those details, because I can tell you from where we sit at the IFA perspective, and when we talk to people that tell the difference between success and failure, are the people who have listened to the directions and the ideas shared by this panel right here. So I think some of the questions that have come up that I definitely want to talk to. So first, Earsa, let me go. We'll kind of work backwards here. So on the legal side, one question that came in is there a preferred or a better business structure when it comes to starting a franchise, LLC, corporation, some of those basics?
Good question. So the preferred or the entity that most used is the LLC. It's a real simple vehicle to start a business. So the LLC is by far the most used, depending on the size of the investment and what's going on, if it's going to be real estate that's going to be held. So you should definitely talk with your attorney about the type of business. We have some clients that have, for instance, like a 10 or 20 store development agreement. As you open additional stores, most people are not thinking about this. It really should be a new entity for that second location. Typically, the agreement is going to provide for like a convenience transfer. So say you sign the development agreement in one entity, and when you're ready to open subsequent stores, so that typically is not going to trigger a transfer fee. That's what we call a convenience transfer. So you can have multiple LLCs. You can also have a holding company and have all of those entities sit under it. So we really sit with the client to find out what their goals are. Is it just going to be one location, multiple locations? Is there going to be real estate that's going to be purchased? So there are some reasons for more complicated structures depending on the entity, but by far the LLC is the leader.
Great, thank you, Earsa. And as you were speaking, I think a plug that I bet you wouldn't necessarily say yourself, so I'm going to say it for you. I think one of the mistakes that I feel like I would hear people make too, though, is when they say, okay, well, I have an attorney, but it's not necessarily an attorney who is a franchise attorney who understands the unique laws, regulatory issues, state-based issues about franchise law in particular. So I think that would be, one suggestion I would want to add on top of it too, to say you want an attorney like an Earsa who has that kind of franchise law experience and being able to connect through some of those, because the law is different, and the law is different by state, and it's not going to be just necessarily opening the same independent business. And Earsa, I would imagine you would concur.
I agree, Ricky, and I would add to that, make sure that it's a franchise attorney, because I can't tell you how many times someone has come to me, they got a general attorney, maybe a family attorney, look at issues, and the first thing that they did was start marking up the franchise agreement like they're going to rewrite the franchise agreement. That's not how it works. And so you definitely want to get someone that's well-versed in franchise. There are certain things that are going to be non-starters, so we don't even put that on the table. That shows a sign that you're not serious or you haven't done your homework. So you definitely want a franchise attorney.
Yeah, that's a great additive point, Earsa. Thank you. Jim, I want to come to you. We've had a couple of financial questions that have come back. So I'm going to start with mine first. This is a little text question, and moderator number 2's prerogative. So I had this moment when you said, first question you're going to talk about when somebody comes in is this a big loan or a small loan? And I had this moment, I was like, Jim, the banker, probably has a different perspective than me, the individual at home, as to what is big and what is small with regard to a loan. So could you maybe contextualize that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the context around that question is really, are you going to borrow a little bit of money or a lot of money, right? You can tell me there's no right or wrong answer there. The reason I ask that question is then I ask, well, how much money do you have for a down payment? And if you've got $10,000 in your checking account and you want to buy a franchise that's going to cost $3 or $4 million, I'm going to be able to answer your question. You need more money. If it's right. So that's why I ask that qualifying question, because it's all relative.
And And so for you, then what you're really kind of looking at is, and so maybe I'm interpreting here, right, as like a potential lender, percentage of how much it's going to take, like how much, you know, so
That's
how
exactly right.
to
That's
borrow.
exactly right. So if you say I want to buy a $1 million franchise, I say, okay, sounds great. I don't know anything about you at that point, and I'll say, okay, well, how much money do you have to put into the transaction? And if you say I've got $100,000, you know, I do the quick math and say that's roughly 10%. Okay, check. Next question. You know, and that's kind of the process that I go through.
That's great. As a follow-up, a question from one of our participants. It said, so how does the bank view an application from someone who left or was let go from the corporate world? You know, they may have good credit, but now no job. Does that eliminate them from consideration for a loan?
No, absolutely not. I think it's probably a good thing that they've got some corporate experience. They can speak to a little bit of their professional background. Yeah, I would say it's generally a good thing, you know, but we would, you know, Connie brought up a great point, you know, are they willing to follow the playbook? That would be kind of a question that I would have. Okay, so you've been in corporate America, presumably you've got some ideas of how the business world works. Are you truly the person that's willing to sort of follow the playbook? You know, but I would say generally speaking, it would be a good thing if someone's worked in corporate America and can demonstrate some professional managerial sort of aptitude of business, but you don't have to have it either. But I would say generally it's a good thing.
Hey, Ricky, it's a good idea too for at least one of the two, if it's a husband and wife, and the gentleman is coming out of corporate America, but the wife has a job that can provide their benefits, that they can continue to hold on to their insurance and retirement benefits until the business gets the lift that it needs to support that need itself.
Well, that's a great point, Stan, because remember, when we look at the loan, we're going to, part A is looking at, does the business or will the business generate enough profit to pay for the loan? But we also got to ask the question, will the business generate enough profit to not only pay for the loan, but pay for the mortgage, the home mortgage, and the food on the table? Because that's real world. You know, if there's not enough money to cover sort of both, then it gets into a tougher situation. And sometimes the way to answer that is, you know, the husband's going to continue his job and the wife is going to go in and sort of run the business, or vice versa. But you've got to account for both.
Ricky,
Can I throw something in?
Yeah, Connie, please.
I just want to throw something in based on when you all were talking about couples too. One of the things that I always say to folks who are buying a franchise and they're married, I'm always asking, is your spouse on board with what you're about to do? Because those first few years, you are living and breathing your business. And I've heard too many people say, this is mine, my husband has nothing to do with it, or vice versa. I'm like, no, when you come home, they're going to have something to do with it, because you're going to be talking about it and you're going to be up late at night. And I've seen too many times where people think that they can separate their franchise business and their spouse literally has nothing to do with it. Indirectly, they're going to be involved because you live with them. So you hope that your spouse is aligned in an agreement with the amount of money and the amount of hours that you're going to be putting into a new business.
I would always counsel prospective franchisees that if you're doing this to replace a job, it's probably not a good idea. How do you feel about having another child? Because what you're going to be doing for the next several years is taking care of a very dependent new business that's going to need you every minute of every day until it matures to the point where maybe you can take hands off a little bit and delegate more. And then the ultimate goal is that the business has reached a place now where you're not taking care of it anymore, but it's taking care of you. And if it's not the life cycle of your thinking, it ought to be, because that's the kind of commitment you'll be making.
Absolutely.
Ricky, I think at this point, maybe ask Phil and yourself if you have any closing thoughts before we run out of time here very quickly, and the same of the panelists. But Phil, I haven't given you a chance to say hello at all. So why not jump in with some closing thoughts?
Thanks so much, Stan. Everyone, the entire panel did a great job of communicating why franchising is a tremendous opportunity. And so when I think about when we first started our relationship between the IFA and USBC, one of the things that stuck out to me was that franchising opportunities or the development of franchising was expected to grow some 3 to 4% in 2021. So we're in October now and looking towards the new year. So I expect that growth to continue even in a COVID environment. We're also learning that more and more people are leaving corporate America and they're looking to do things on their own, and franchising is one of those opportunities. Now, when you think about our community only has, I believe, 8 to 10% of franchise establishments are owned by folks in the Black community. So there is a tremendous opportunity here for our community to step into franchising. A couple other things I want to touch on is at USBC, one of our pillars is access to capital or supporting access to capital. And when Jim Fliss, he harkened back to a time when there was a crusty old banker that would take your financials and throw them in the trash. Well, we're certainly moved to a point in time where we're seeing more opportunities for access to capital and lending for folks in the Black community. And so now's the time to definitely take advantage of that. So I really liked what I heard here today. I think it supports the USBC mission and vision. And so I hope that you all took away something substantial from what our panelists said today. So thank you all. Thank you.
Ricky, anything else as a closing thought?
I will just echo where Philip has landed us here too. It has been such a pleasure to work with you and the whole USBC team and the membership. We look forward to continued opportunities. This is, it's not a conversation that ends just because 2021 is over, right? This is a lifelong journey and commitment for a lot of us. So I look forward to finding continued opportunities for all of us to work together. I'll do a couple of logistical announcements here too, that just to remind everybody, because we often, can I get the slides? Will I get access to this later? And the answers are yes. We will send out an email with a link to this program, as well as the other 3 in the series, if this is the first one that you're dialing into, so you can access all 4 parts of the content. We encourage you to share it with others if they're going to be joining you in the journey, because I could not agree more with our closing comments. Even looking at Connie's situation, her mom is up there cooking her dinner and she is part of this and she's given up her basement. This is day in and day out. These are the stories that we hear at the IFA about, people who have come into franchising as part of their journey and it has transformed their lives. And so we want to help be part of that. And we encourage all of you to help advance that through education by reaching out to folks like those that are here today. So a huge thank you, Earsa, a huge thank you, Connie, for sharing your expertise on the ground. Thank you, Philip, as our partnership with the U.S. Black Chamber. Ashley, for making sure that the backbone is here and that we're able to get these events running with the U.S. Black Chamber. Stan, thank you for moderating and helping us to put a really great arc together on all 4 programs. Jim, KeyBank, we could not do this without you. So we truly and sincerely thank you for your sponsorship and helping to make sure that we were having these critical conversations, and we look forward for more to come. When we send out this email to all of our registrants with information, it will also include links to the resources we've referenced today. So information about SCORE, information about our speakers who were on here, franchise opportunities guide, you name it, and anything else that we can think of that will be helpful to all of you. So again, thank you very much for joining us on our journey here today. Thank you all for sharing your expertise and your story. And Stan, if you have anything else to say, I would turn that back over to you. Otherwise, on behalf of the IFA Foundation and the Diversity Institute, we say thank you very much.
When do I never have something else to say, Ricky? Come on.
I might have suggested you, Stan.
I want to add Karen White to the thank you list, who has worked diligently backstage on the KeyBank side, as Ashley has on the IFA side. And while you don't see her or hear from her here, none of this happens without her. So Karen, I know you're listening. Thank you so much. Ashley, the same to you. Ricky, yes. I can't find enough words for you. Connie and Earsa, the same. I want to close this out. Phil, awesome, except for your choice in baseball teams. You and I are brethren. One last closing thought to share, and that is very applicable to what we're here and talking about as pertains to entrepreneurship. And it's a definition of entrepreneurship that I learned years ago, and I want to share it with you here. Connie, you brought it to light when you said how hard you work and how much you have to do and how many things you have to do just have to be done and there's no one else to do it. Entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so that you can live the rest of your life like most people can't. And I'm going to leave you with that. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us.